Hello and welcome back. It's time for this evening's Focus. Today we take a closer look at the crackdown in Iran. This year's Ashura religious festival was particularly bloody in the Islamic Republic. Opposition protesters seized the opportunity to rally in the capital Tehran, chanting anti-government slogans, and the demonstrations turned into showdown with the security forces. As tens of thousands poured into the streets of the Iranian capital, the police fired tear gas and beat protesters with batons. At least 8 people were killed in the clashes. And today, Monday, the crackdown continued with the arrest of key members of the opposition. Among them, 2 aides to the reformist former president Mohammad Khatami and 3 close aides to Mir Hossein Mousavi, this past June's defeated presidential candidate. Now, the weekend's violence has been the worst since the post-election unrest in June. Before going on to interview our guests, let's look back on the few months of political crisis in Iran.
30 years after its founding revolution, 2009 has seen the Islamic Republic of Iran enter one of the most unstable periods in its history. In June, Conservative President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was re-elected, but the results were contested, and the ensuing protests descended into violence.
This is not just some little group of people or motivated from outside. This is a real internal rebellion against the government, against the revolutionary Islamic governing system. A lot of Iranians are saying they don't want to live with this kind of political system.
There's been tension within the country, but also on an international level. US President Barack Obama gave Iran until the end of 2009 to unclench its fist regarding its nuclear program. Tehran insists its nuclear intentions are peaceful, but for the West, an element of doubt remains.
Our policies are transparent. If we wanted to build an atomic bomb, we would have the courage to say so. When we say we're not building it, that is the truth. We do not believe in nuclear weapons, and we fear no one.
Iran is facing additional sanctions for concealing the construction of a new uranium enrichment facility. Tehran's defiance could prove counterproductive for the Islamic Republic.
The Iranians are willing to respect the international rules of uranium enrichment and inspections and all that, and not creating weapons. They're perfectly willing to do that, but they want to be treated equally with other people. They don't want to be subjected to a colonial double standard, and this is why they are very defiant.
2010 will be a crucial year for Iran. 6 months after the elections, December has seen more street fighting and protest against the regime. Demonstrators show no sign of giving up.
Well, joining me now to discuss this political crisis is Borzou Daragahi in Beirut, Middle East correspondent for the Los Angeles Times and Iran specialist. Borzou, thanks for being with us for tonight's Focus. About the opposition movement, many of the opposition supporters this weekend were chanting slogans in favor of Mir Hossein Mousavi, who's June's defeated presidential candidate. So is the movement only asking for a reformist president, or are they asking for regime change altogether? In other words, do we have a revolution on our hands in Iran?
I don't think that we have a revolution on our hands. There are some elements within the opposition who are calling for more radical change, but those are, it seems to me that they are a minority. There's always been a certain percentage of people in Iran who have been opposed to the Islamic Republic, opposed to the Islamic system. Those people have definitely grown more vocal and more bold in recent months. But you got to look at the birth of this movement. This movement was born out of the civil society movement and civil society organizations initiated under the reformist presidency of Mohammad Khatami. Iran's authorities saw this trend, saw this reformist movement as a threat, and they tried to repress that civil society, those civil society movements. And now you're seeing the result of that. And if you talk to Iranian people, which I have, and I was recently in Iran, you see that they have experienced a revolution once. They saw how bloody and traumatic it was, and they would rather not go through that kind of trauma again.
Now, Borzou, today we saw the arrests of several opposition figures, including some prominent figures and some aides to Mohammad Khatami, some aides to Mir Hossein Mousavi. Will these arrests succeed, in your opinion, in silencing the opposition?
No, I don't think that they will. This kind of wave of arrests has happened before in the last 6 months. If viewers recall, we also had those trials, those mass trials derided by critics as show trials. And those were also meant to silence and discredit the opposition. That didn't work either. The Iranian authorities are cycling through a sort of bag of tricks, using tools that they've used in the past to stop opposition, to stop dissidents, and they're finding that this time none of those tricks are working, and they're a little bit confused, it seems. There's a little bit of a leadership power vacuum at the top at this point, and so I would describe what they're doing as flailing about.
So you say these arrests will not help the government counter the opposition. Are the protests set to continue in the coming days? Are any more protests planned?
I've talked to some activists today. There are not protests planned for the coming days. There might be some wildcat events. What people are looking forward to is the 40th day following the death of Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, who was Iran's leading cleric. The 40th is a religiously significant holiday. And the 22nd of the Persian month of Bahman, that's the anniversary of the revolution, where there's typically a big parade. That's in February 10th or 11th. People will head out to the streets on that date as well.
Now, Borzou, one quick question for you. President Ahmadinejad seems to be between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he's got pressure from the West regarding the nuclear program, condemnation from the West regarding this crackdown. On the other, pressure from inside. Where does he go from here?
You know, I'd add even pressure from his fellow conservatives who are pushing him about here and there. You know, if you look at the situation in Iran now, Ahmadinejad seems an increasingly small figure and slight figure. He has very little power now in the game. If you recall, earlier in the summer, people were talking about him competing against the supreme leader. And now no one is talking about that anymore. He's a sort of non-issue more and more as the opposition becomes more and more focused on changing certain fundamental aspects of the system itself.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. Borzou Daragahi reporting from Beirut. And now to our second guest in tonight's Focus, Mr. Ali Reza Jafarzadeh in Washington. You're the president of Strategic Policy Consulting in D.C., an outspoken critic of the Iranian regime and also an analyst, foreign policy analyst on Fox News. Thanks very much for joining us on France24. Many Western countries have condemned Iran's crackdown on the opposition. The UK has praised the protesters' courage. Is the West playing a part in encouraging or perhaps even in helping the opposition, or is the movement purely endogenous?
Well, I think certainly it's long overdue for the Western countries, especially the United States and the major European countries, to condemn the crackdown on the opposition, but also to side with the people of Iran who are standing up in millions, calling for the change of the regime, calling the supreme leader a killer, a murderer. They calling for death to a dictator and saying that we want democracy and the political freedoms. In reality, what we see in Iran today is a revolution in the making. This is the beginning of the end of the Iranian regime, period. I think the developments yesterday clearly show the whole world, if they're willing to watch, that the outpour of the Iranian population has gone way beyond the presidential elections. That's how it started in June. There was no mention of Ahmadinejad or any other candidates. It was all focused on the supreme leader, Khamenei, which is the fulcrum of the whole system, and calling him a dictator, calling for ousting of the entire clerical system. This is what they call the Islamic regime, because it was the anniversary of Ashura, and this regime claims to have religious credentials, religious legitimacy, and people were comparing Khamenei with Yazid, who was the person who actually ordered the killing of the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. And the fact that as many as 8 or 10 people were killed on that Ashura day further confirmed the belief of the people that the supreme leader is actually another Yazid. So when they call the supreme leader a Yazid and they want the overthrow of the whole system, this is not just minor changes that people are looking forward. They're looking for the overthrow of the entire regime.
Thanks very much, Mr. Ali Reza Jafarzadeh. I'm afraid that's all we have time for in tonight's focus. Thanks for speaking to France24, so differing opinions from our guests today. Some of them, but Mr. Jafarzadeh believes a revolution is underway in Iran. We, of course, remind our viewers these reflect the views only of our guests and not the views of France24. Thank you for watching tonight's focus. More news is coming up in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.